I'm Lillian, 32, a single mother to my beautiful baby boy Noah. Motherhood has given me the greatest joy I've ever known, but it also led to the most painful betrayal of my life. At what should have been a simple family dinner with my wealthy in-laws, they mocked my precious baby and me without mercy. I endured their cruelty silently until I couldn't anymore. Then I slid an envelope across that gleaming mahogany table that changed everything. Before I tell you what was inside that envelope and how it silenced an entire room of powerful people, please like and subscribe, and let me know where you're watching from. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this ends. My life before marriage was ambitious and focused. I worked as a marketing executive for a major firm in New York City, climbing the corporate ladder with determination and skill. My days were filled with meetings, presentations, and networking events. My evenings often stretched late into the night as I fine-tuned campaigns and strategies. I was respected in my field and proud of the career I had built from scratch. Then I met Jason Harrison at a charity gala. He was handsome in that polished, privileged way that spoke of old money and expensive education. His smile charmed everyone in the room, but somehow he only had eyes for me that night. I was flattered by his attention, intrigued by his intelligence, and I admit a little dazzled by his status. Jason was the heir to the Harrison fortune, a family known for their chain of luxury hotels and real estate holdings across the country. Their name appeared in society pages and business journals with equal frequency. When he asked for my number that night, I gave it without hesitation, though I never imagined what would follow. Our romance was straight out of a movie. Dinners at exclusive restaurants, weekend getaways on private jets, surprise gifts delivered to my office. Jason pursued me with an intensity that swept me off my feet. Within 6 months, he proposed on a yacht in the Mediterranean, presenting a diamond ring that caught the sunset in ways that seemed magical. The wedding was extravagant, featured in several magazines, and attended by people whose names I had only read about. I felt like Cinderella marrying into a family whose wealth and connections seemed to open every door. Jason's parents, Richard and Victoria Harrison, hosted our rehearsal dinner at their mansion in the Hamptons, making toasts about welcoming me into their prestigious family. At first, the Harrisons seemed to accept me. Victoria took me shopping and to lunch with her society friends. Richard discussed business ventures with me, occasionally asking for my marketing perspective. Jason's younger sister Amanda invited me to spa days and charity committees, but there were subtle signs of judgment that I chose to ignore. Comments about my modest background. Questions about my family that felt more like interrogations. Suggestions about how I should dress or speak at certain events. The way conversations would sometimes pause when I entered a room. Despite these undercurrents, I was happy with Jason. We moved into a penthouse apartment, traveled the world, and built what I thought was a solid foundation. After 2 years of marriage, I began to talk about having a baby. Jason was less enthusiastic, always finding reasons to wait. Another year for his promotion, another 6 months for a big business deal, another vacation we should take while we still can. I was patient, but as I approached 30, my desire for a child grew stronger. Jason reluctantly agreed, though he stipulated that we would have just one, and would need to hire the best nannies so that our lifestyle wouldn't be disrupted. I was so happy about his agreement that I overlooked the conditions. For nearly a year, we tried without success. I underwent fertility tests, tracked ovulation, and scheduled our intimate moments with clinical precision. Jason grew frustrated with the process, often finding excuses to be away on business during my fertile windows. But finally, miraculously, I saw those 2 pink lines on a pregnancy test. I planned an elaborate dinner to tell Jason the news, decorating our dining room and preparing his favorite meal. When I finally told him, his reaction wasn't what I had imagined. Instead of joy, his face showed shock, then something that looked disturbingly like resentment. "Are you sure?" he asked coldly. "We've been careful lately." His implication stung, but I showed him the 3 different tests I had taken. He nodded slowly, then said he had work to do and disappeared into his office for the rest of the evening. No hug, no kiss, no celebration. In the days that followed, Jason became increasingly distant. He worked later, travelled more frequently, and when he was home, he barely acknowledged my presence. When I tried to discuss baby names or nursery ideas, he would change the subject or find a reason to leave the room. My friend Rachel, who had been my confidant since college, noticed the change in him immediately. "Something's not right, Lil," she warned during our lunch dates. "This isn't how a father-to-be acts." I defended Jason, making excuses about work stress and adjustment periods. But deep down, I knew she was right. The man I had married was revealing his true colors, and they were nothing like the palette I had fallen in love with. As my body began to change, Jason's distance turned to barely concealed disgust. He stopped sleeping in our bed, claiming my pregnancy, snoring kept him awake. He declined attending doctor's appointments, saying business meetings couldn't be rescheduled. When I showed him the first ultrasound picture, he glanced at it quickly and muttered, "Looks like a blob," before walking away. Despite his behavior, I remained committed to our marriage and our coming child. I believed that once the baby arrived, Jason would fall in love just as I had already done. I clung to stories of fathers who bonded with their children at birth, convinced that Jason would be transformed by the miracle of meeting his son or daughter. Rachel stood by me through it all, bringing me ginger tea for morning sickness and accompanying me to prenatal classes that Jason should have attended. She helped me prepare the nursery on weekends when Jason was working, though we both suspected otherwise. What I didn't know then was that the Harrisons had a history of secrets much darker than I could have imagined. Secrets that would eventually come to light in ways that would change everything. But as my baby grew inside me, creating the gentle swell beneath my heart, I remained ignorant of what was to come. I focused instead on the life I was creating, unaware that my marriage was already beyond repair. My pregnancy quickly became more difficult than I had anticipated. Morning sickness lasted all day, and by my 5th month, I was diagnosed with gestational diabetes that required careful monitoring and a strict diet. My doctor recommended reducing my work hours, which meant a significant cut in my income, but was necessary for the baby's health. Jason seemed annoyed rather than concerned by my complications. He complained about having to drive me to appointments and about the bland, healthy meals I now prepared. When I was put on partial bed rest during my 6th month, he barely adjusted his schedule to help. I didn't sign up to be a caretaker, he snapped one evening when I asked him to pick up my prescription. Can't you get your friend Rachel to do these things? I tried to stay positive, talking to my growing belly when I was alone, promising my baby a world of love, even as my marriage continued to fracture. I created a pregnancy journal documenting each kick and hiccup, including ultrasound photos and my hopes for the future. Jason never once asked to see it. It was during my 7th month, while Jason was supposedly at a business conference in Chicago, that I received a text clearly not meant for me. It came late at night, a message from someone named Kayla, with a selfie attached. "Missing you tonight, babe. Hotel room feels empty without you." The woman in the photo was beautiful blonde and definitely not pregnant. My hands shook as I scrolled through Jason's texts, finding months of messages between them dating back to my 1st trimester. The betrayal was comprehensive, with hotel receipts, intimate photos, and plans for future rendezvous. When Jason returned 2 days later, I confronted him with the evidence. Instead of denying it or apologizing, he looked at me with cold eyes. "What did you expect, Lillian?" he said with cruel casualness. "Look at yourself. I have needs, and I need someone who doesn't look like that." He gestured dismissively at my pregnant body, and something inside me broke. The man I had married, the father of my child, saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience, my pregnancy, a temporary condition that justified his infidelity. "This is your child," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "How can you do this to us?" Jason's response was a lesson in heartlessness. "The baby was your idea, not mine. You pushed for it, even when I told you I wasn't ready." When I called Victoria, my mother-in-law, hoping for support or intervention, she was surprisingly unsympathetic. "Marriage has its challenges, Lillian," she said stiffly. "Jason has always felt pressured by your biological clock. Perhaps you should have been more patient." The rest of the Harrison family quickly aligned with Jason. Richard suggested that the pregnancy had been my unilateral decision. Amanda, who had once been friendly, now barely returned my calls. I was astonished by how quickly they closed ranks, defending Jason's behavior while questioning mine. Only Rachel remained steadfast, bringing me groceries, driving me to appointments, and letting me cry on her shoulder when the pain became too much. "They're showing you who they really are," she said firmly. Believe them. The final weeks of my pregnancy were a lonely vigil. Jason moved into the guest room permanently and was often absent for days at a time. I prepared for birth alone, packing my hospital bag and installing the car seat by myself. Rachel promised to be my birth partner, the only person I could count on. Noah James Matthews was born on a rainy Tuesday in April after 20 hours of labour. He had a full head of dark hair and eyes that seemed to recognise me instantly. When they placed him on my chest skin to skin, I felt a love so profound it nearly crushed me with its intensity. My son, my perfect, beautiful son. Jason wasn't there. He had been unreachable for hours, his phone going straight to voicemail. Rachel held my hand through contractions, coached my breathing, and cut the umbilical cord. She was the first person besides me to hold Noah, tears streaming down her face as she welcomed him to the world. Jason appeared 3 days later, smelling of expensive cologne and looking uncomfortable in the hospital room. He glanced at Noah briefly, not asking to hold him. "He looks like your side of the family," he said, as if that were a disappointment. For a brief time after we brought Noah home, there was an uneasy truce. Jason seemed to make an effort, occasionally holding the baby and helping with a nighttime feeding. I desperately wanted to believe he was finally embracing fatherhood, that we could rebuild our family from this fragile foundation. But the effort was short-lived. By the time Noah was 2 months old, Jason announced he was moving out. "This isn't working, Lillian. I'm not cut out for this domesticity. The crying, the diapers, the constant needs. I need my space." I wasn't even surprised. The betrayal had cut so deep that this final abandonment felt almost inevitable. As Jason packed his things, I discovered a locked drawer in his office desk. Using a paperclip to jimmy it open, I found a folder of documents that made little sense to me at first. Financial statements, legal agreements, and old photographs. I quickly made copies of everything before returning the originals, sensing they might be important later. Instead of confronting Jason immediately, I decided to wait and investigate further. Something told me these papers were a key to understanding the Harrison family, and perhaps to protecting my son's future. As Jason walked out the door with his suitcases, leaving his wedding ring on the counter without a word, I held Noah close and whispered a promise. "It's just us now, little one, and I will always, always fight for you." The divorce papers arrived by courier exactly 1 week after Jason moved out. The terms were insulting minimal child support, no alimony, and a demand that I vacate our apartment within 30 days. The accompanying note from his lawyer stated that since I had sufficient education and work experience, I should have no trouble supporting myself and the child. The child. Not his son or even Noah, just the child, as if my beautiful baby boy was some abstract legal concept rather than a human being with Jason's DNA. Richard Harrison called the next day, his voice carrying that particular tone of the wealthy when they're attempting to be reasonable while making unreasonable demands. "Lillian, we're prepared to offer you a lump sum settlement if you'll agree to a quick, quiet divorce. Jason is under considerable stress, and protracted legal proceedings would only make things difficult for everyone." By everyone, I understood he meant the Harrisons, not me, and certainly not Noah. And what about Noah's relationship with his father, with all of you? There was a telling pause before Richard answered. "Of course Jason will fulfill his legal obligations. As for family relationships, well, those tend to evolve naturally over time." In other words, they were planning to write us off to reduce Jason's connection to his son to the minimum required by law. I thought of the mysterious documents I had found and decided to bide my time. "I'll review the offer with my attorney," I said, though I hadn't even hired one yet. The truth was, I couldn't afford legal representation that would match the Harrisons' high-priced team. My mother flew in from Arizona to help for 2 weeks, her presence a balm during those initial devastating days. She cooked, cleaned, and cared for Noah while I cried and tried to figure out our future. Her practical Midwestern sensibility was exactly what I needed. "You're stronger than you know, Lillian," she said as she packed to leave. "And that little boy needs you to remember that every day." After she left, the reality of single motherhood hit me full force. I had to find a job that would accommodate a newborn, secure, affordable housing, and somehow create a life from the wreckage Jason had left behind, all while functioning on minimal sleep and healing physically from childbirth. Meanwhile, the Harrison family began a subtle campaign to undermine me. Friends mentioned hearing rumors about my emotional instability during pregnancy. A former colleague called to ask if it was true that I had trapped Jason into marriage with a planned pregnancy. Someone even contacted Child Protective Services with anonymous concerns about Noah's care, leading to a stressful home visit that found nothing amiss. The pattern was clear. They were attempting to paint me as an unfit mother, perhaps building a case for limited custody or supervised visitation. The thought of losing any time with Noah terrified me more than anything. Through a former client, I secured a position at a smaller marketing firm that allowed me to work partially from home. The salary was significantly less than I had earned before, but the flexibility was worth it. I found a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a less fashionable neighborhood and created a cozy nursery for Noah with furniture from second-hand shops. Noah developed colic and reflux that required special formula and frequent doctor visits. The medical bills mounted eating into my savings despite the insurance. He cried for hours each evening, his little face red with discomfort, and I paced the apartment with him in my arms, singing, swaying, trying everything to ease his pain. Jason sent the support payments through his attorney, never inquiring about Noah's health or development. When I emailed him about the special formula and additional medical expenses, his lawyer responded that the agreed-upon support was generous and sufficient. The loneliness was perhaps the hardest part. Midnight feedings with no one to take a turn, making every decision from pediatricians to childcare without a partner to consult. The bone-deep exhaustion that never quite lifted. Friends with conventional lives and regular schedules, gradually fell away, unable to accommodate the chaos of my new existence. One night, scrolling through social media during a 3 a.m. feeding, I saw a photo that stole my breath. Jason at a Hamptons party, his arm around a slender brunette, both of them laughing into the camera. The caption identified her as Sophia Coleman, daughter of a banking executive. They looked happy, carefree, and completely unburdened by the responsibilities I carried every day. I closed the app and looked down at Noah, finally peaceful in sleep. His long eyelashes rested on round cheeks, his perfect lips slightly parted. How could Jason not want this? How could he choose cocktail parties and a new girlfriend over watching his son grow? A week later, I received a surprising phone call from Eleanor Harrison, Jason's grandmother. At 82, she was the family matriarch, still sharp and formidable despite her age. She had always been cordial to me, but not particularly warm. "Lillian, I'd like to see my great-grandson," she said without preamble. "Would you bring him to tea next Thursday?" Suspicious but intrigued, I agreed. Eleanor lived in her own wing of the Harrison estate, but operated somewhat independently from her son Richard and his wife. At tea, she held Noah with practiced ease, studying his face intently. "He has the Harrison chin," she observed. "And the eyes. I'd know those eyes anywhere." As Noah dozed in her arms, Eleanor spoke in cryptic terms about family history and patterns repeating. "The Harrison men have always had a certain weakness," she said, "a tendency to run when things require real character." Before I left, she pressed my hand firmly. "Richard and Victoria think they control this family, but there are things they don't know about. Things I've kept track of over the years. Stay strong, Lillian. History has a way of coming to light." Her words left me puzzled but somehow comforted. At least one Harrison acknowledged Noah's place in the family, even if the others wished to erase it. And her hints about family secrets aligned with the documents I had been slowly piecing together, documents that suggested the Harrisons had faced similar situations before and handled them in ways that protected their reputation at all costs. As I drove home with Noah sleeping in his car seat, I wondered what Eleanor knew and why she had reached out now. Whatever her reasons, her recognition of Noah as a true Harrison felt like the first small victory in what I was beginning to realize would be a long battle for my son's rightful place in the world. The crisp white envelope arrived 3 months after Jason moved out. Inside was a formal invitation to the annual Harrison family dinner, an elaborate affair held each year to celebrate the founding of Harrison Hotels. I stared at the heavy cardstock with its gold embossing, certain there must be some mistake. The Harrisons had made it abundantly clear that Noah and I were inconvenient complications in their perfect family narrative. Jason had not seen his son in months, sending support payments through attorneys and ignoring my updates about Noah's milestones. Why would they invite us into their inner sanctum? Now I called Rachel immediately. "It has to be a trap," she said after I read her the invitation. "They want to humiliate you somehow, or maybe pressure you about the divorce settlement." Her concerns matched my own suspicions. The Harrison family dinner was legendary, attended by business partners, political connections, and social elites. It was not a place for awkward family reunions or sincere reconciliations. "Don't go, Lil," Rachel urged. "Nothing good can come from putting yourself in their territory." I was inclined to agree until Eleanor Harrison called the next day. Her voice slightly wavery with age, but still commanding cut through my doubts. "You received the invitation," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, but I don't understand why. Jason hasn't seen Noah in months." Victoria barely acknowledged my last email with his photos. Eleanor sighed deeply. "The dinner is important, Lillian. More important than you know. Noah is a Harrison whether they like it or not. His place at that table matters." "Are you saying I should go?" "I'm saying some battles must be fought face to face. and some truths need witnesses to be truly heard. Her cryptic answer left me more confused, but something in her tone convinced me. This wasn't just about an uncomfortable dinner, something larger was at stake. "Will you be there?" I asked. "I wouldn't miss it," Eleanor replied, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "I've been waiting for this dinner for a very long time." After speaking with Eleanor, I made my decision. I would attend the dinner not for Jason or his family, but for Noah. Whatever game the Harrisons were playing, I needed to show them that we wouldn't be intimidated or erased. The next 2 weeks were filled with preparations. I found a simple but elegant black dress that flattered my post-baby figure, which had mostly returned to normal, but still carried the softness of new motherhood. I scheduled a hair appointment and splurged on a professional makeup session, determined to look my best. The childcare situation proved more complicated. My regular sitter was unavailable, and everyone else I trusted was either working or too far away. Rachel offered, but then got called for a work emergency that would keep her at the office late. "Bring him," Eleanor said when I called in desperation the day before the dinner. "It's time they all saw him properly. Bring a baby to a formal dinner, Eleanor, that's not practical." Nothing about this situation is practical, dear, but sometimes the unexpected creates the perfect opportunity. Reluctantly, I packed Noah's diaper bag with extra everything: clothes, bottles, pacifiers, toys, and blankets. I dressed him in an adorable blue outfit that brought out the colour of his eyes. Harrison eyes, as Eleanor had noted. I rehearsed early departures and polite excuses in case he became fussy, and I steeled myself for whatever reception awaited us. The Harrison estate sprawled across 5 acres in the most exclusive part of Greenwich, Connecticut. As my Uber passed through the wrought iron gates and up the long tree-lined drive, I felt my anxiety spike. The mansion loomed ahead, every window ablaze with light. Luxury cars lined the circular drive, and uniformed valets assisted guests from Bentleys and Mercedes. Noah, blissfully unaware of my inner turmoil, cooed happily in his carrier as we approached the grand entrance. The butler's expression when he saw the baby was a masterpiece of suppressed shock, but he recovered quickly, directing us to the main salon, where pre-dinner drinks were being served. The room fell into a momentary hush as I entered with Noah. Conversations paused and heads turned to stare at the unexpected addition to the guest list. Victoria Harrison, resplendent in diamonds and midnight blue silk, was the first to approach, her smile tight and her eyes cold. "Lillian, what a surprise. We didn't realize you were bringing the baby." The way she hesitated before acknowledging Noah spoke volumes. He wasn't a grandchild to her. He was an inconvenience, an embarrassment. "His name is Noah," I said firmly, "and I couldn't find childcare. I hope that's not a problem." Before Victoria could respond, Jason appeared at her side. He looked thin and tense, his usual confidence dimmed somewhat. Beside him stood a woman I recognized from social media as Sophia Coleman, her hand possessively on his arm. Jason's face when he saw Noah was a complex mix of emotions: shock, discomfort, and something that might have been longing quickly suppressed. "You brought him here," he said in a low voice. "He's your son Jason. Your family should know him." Sophia shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting between Jason and the baby. Clearly this wasn't how she had expected the evening to unfold. Richard Harrison joined our awkward circle, clapping Jason on the shoulder and nodding curtly to me. "Well, this is unexpected, but we'll manage. The nanny can watch him during dinner." "I didn't bring a nanny," I replied. "And Noah stays with me." Richard's face tightened, but Eleanor's timely arrival prevented whatever retort he had planned. She moved slowly with her cane, but her presence commanded attention. "There's my great-grandson," she announced loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "Bring him here, Lillian. Let me hold him before dinner." As I handed Noah to Eleanor, I caught the looks exchanged between Richard, Victoria, and Jason. Something was definitely happening beneath the surface of this gathering, some current of tension that I didn't fully understand. Throughout the cocktail hour, I endured subtle jabs about my appearance. "You look so well considering my career. Finding any time to work with the baby. And my parenting. Are you still breastfeeding? Bottle feeding is so much more convenient." Noah miraculously remained content, charming several of the guests with his smiles and babbling. Jason kept his distance, though I caught him watching us several times. Sophia made a point of displaying her affection for him, touching his arm and laughing too loudly at his comments. Her diamond bracelet caught the light whenever she moved, a not-so-subtle reminder of the lifestyle she enjoyed that had once been mine. As we moved into the dining room, I could feel the power dynamics at play around the massive mahogany table. The seating arrangement placed me far from Jason and his parents, next to distant relatives and business associates who seemed unsure how to interact with me. Noah dozed in his carrier beside my chair, the white noise of dinner conversation keeping him peaceful. Eleanor, seated across from me, caught my eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod. Whatever reason she had wanted me here, I sensed the moment was approaching. Dinner began with Richard Harrison's traditional toast to family legacy and business success. Crystal glasses clinked as the 50 or so guests sipped champagne and murmured appreciative comments about the Harrison empire. 7 generations of excellence, Richard proclaimed, standing at the head of the table. The Harrison name stands for integrity, vision, and unwavering standards in everything we do. I noticed Eleanor's slight smirk at these words, her fingers tapping thoughtfully against her water glass. She caught my eye briefly, and I sensed she found her son's pomposity as ironic as I did. The first course arrived, a delicate seafood appetizer arranged with artistic precision. As conversation resumed around the table, Jason's younger sister Amanda leaned across to address me. "So Lillian, are you still in that tiny apartment? It must be challenging with a baby." Her tone suggested concern, but her eyes gleamed with something less charitable. Before I could respond, Victoria joined in. "We offered Lillian a very generous settlement, but she's been quite resistant. Sometimes pride gets in the way of practical decisions." Several heads turned in our direction, sensing emerging drama. I maintained my composure, cutting my appetizer into small bites while formulating a response that wouldn't escalate the situation. "Noah and I are comfortable, thank you, and the settlement discussions are between our attorneys." Richard cleared his throat from the head of the table. "Speaking of family matters, we have some exciting announcements about the expansion of Harrison Holdings. Jason has been instrumental in our acquisition of the Singapore properties." The conversation shifted to business, with detailed discussions of hotel renovations and profit projections. I noticed how carefully they constructed a narrative that positioned Jason as the brilliant heir, continuing the family legacy. There was no mention of his abandoned responsibilities, his broken vows, or his son quietly sleeping beside me. Noah began to stir as the main course arrived, perfect slices of beef tenderloin with truffle-infused sides. I quickly gave him a pacifier and rocked his carrier gently with my foot, praying he would settle. For a moment it seemed to work. "The Harrison bloodline has always been our greatest asset," Richard continued, now deep into his third glass of wine. "Our business acumen, our social connections, our particular instinct for opportunity, these traits run strong in true Harrison blood." His emphasis on true was subtle but unmistakable, a clear message about Noah's place or lack thereof in the family hierarchy. Noah chose that moment to fully awaken, blinking up at the chandelier light, before letting out a small whimper that threatened to become a full cry. I quickly lifted him from the carrier, whispering soothing words against his soft hair. Victoria's lips thinned with disapproval. "Perhaps you should take him outside until he settles." "He's fine," I replied, bouncing Noah gently on my knee. "He just woke up in a strange place." Jason's new girlfriend, Sophia, who had been relatively quiet, suddenly spoke. "I think babies need routine. Isn't it past his bedtime?" "I'm sure Lillian knows what's best for her child," Eleanor interjected, her voice carrying surprising strength. "After all, she's the one raising him." The emphasis on she's hung in the air, an unmistakable indictment of Jason's absence. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Noah began to fuss more insistently, his little face scrunching up as he worked toward a proper cry. I reached for a bottle in the diaper bag, knowing he was probably hungry. "Really, Lillian, this is inappropriate," Victoria said sharply. "A formal dinner is no place for feeding a baby. Would you prefer he cries through the next 3 courses?" I asked, my patience wearing thin. As I adjusted Noah to give him his bottle, Victoria continued her criticism. "This is exactly the sort of parenting that concerns us. No structure, no consideration for appropriate settings." "Mother?" Jason finally spoke, though his voice lacked conviction. "Let's not do this now. I'm simply pointing out that there are standards of behavior, Jason, standards that seem to be lacking in Noah's upbringing." Noah, picking up on the tension, rejected the bottle and began to cry in earnest. His wails echoed in the high-ceilinged dining room, cutting through the polite murmurs of conversation. "Perhaps he doesn't feel comfortable with strangers," Sophia remarked with false sweetness. "Though I must say he doesn't look much like Jason, does he?" Those dark curls certainly aren't a Harrison trait. The implication was clear, and I felt heat rise to my face as I comforted my crying son. Jason's laugh in response to Sophia's comment cut deeper than I expected. "I've thought the same thing," he said loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Not much family resemblance at all." Eleanor's teacup clattered sharply against its saucer, her eyes flashing with rare anger. "That's quite enough, Jason," but the damage was done. Other guests were exchanging glances, some uncomfortable, others clearly entertained by the unfolding drama. Richard attempted to redirect conversation to safer topics, but the pattern had been established. Every time Noah made a sound, someone at the Harrison end of the table would make a thinly veiled comment about proper parenting, appropriate behavior, or Noah's appearance. As Noah's crying increased, I stood to walk him around, patting his back soothingly. Victoria watched with obvious distaste. "This is why children have nannies," she said to the woman beside her, not bothering to lower her voice. "Some women simply aren't equipped for motherhood." Jason failed to defend me, instead engaging Sophia in a whispered conversation that made her giggle behind her hand. I caught fragments about always wanted drama and using the kid for attention. It was in that moment, rocking my son while enduring their mockery, that everything crystallized for me. This wasn't just about me. They were rejecting Noah too, questioning his paternity, dismissing his legitimacy as a Harrison. My sweet, innocent baby was being erased from his father's family before he could even speak his first word. The documents I had found in Jason's desk flashed through my mind. The financial statements showing regular payments to someone identified only by initials. The legal agreement with strict confidentiality clauses. The old photograph of a young woman holding a baby, her face bearing a striking resemblance to Jason himself. I had spent weeks piecing together what those documents might mean, reaching out to contacts in legal circles, searching public records. What I had discovered was exactly what Eleanor had hinted at, a Harrison family pattern that was now repeating itself with Noah and me. Noah finally settled against my shoulder, his little body warm and trusting. His complete dependency on me, his absolute innocence in this cruel adult world, filled me with a clarity and courage I hadn't felt since before his birth. As dessert was served, an elaborate chocolate creation that no one at our end of the table touched, Richard began discussing the Harrison Family Charitable Foundation and their dedication to family values. The hypocrisy was so blatant that I nearly laughed aloud. Noah was calm now, looking around with curious eyes. I settled back in my chair, positioning him comfortably on my lap. With my free hand, I reached for my purse hanging on the back of the chair. Inside was the envelope I had prepared weeks ago, but had never found the right moment to use. Seeing the Harrisons' true colours displayed so nakedly tonight, I knew that moment had arrived. Victoria was mid-sentence about the Foundation's support of traditional family structures when I slid the manila envelope across the table toward Jason. The movement caught everyone's attention, conversations faltering as all eyes turned to the envelope and then to me. "What's this?" Jason asked, not reaching for it. I looked him directly in the eyes, my voice steady and clear in the sudden quiet. "Something I think everyone here should see." The dining room had fallen into that particular silence that follows an unexpected moment, the collective held breath of people sensing drama about to unfold. The envelope sat untouched in front of Jason, who stared at it as if it might contain something dangerous. "If you won't open it," I said calmly, "I'm happy to share the contents myself." My tone must have conveyed my seriousness, because Jason finally reached for the envelope, his fingers slightly unsteady. Richard and Victoria exchanged concerned glances, while Sophia leaned away slightly as if distancing herself from whatever was about to happen. "This is hardly the time or place for personal matters," Victoria attempted, but her voice lacked its usual authority. Eleanor spoke up from her seat, her aged voice carrying surprising strength. "On the contrary, Victoria, I believe this is exactly the right time and place." Jason opened the envelope and pulled out the first document. His face paled as he recognized what he was holding. "Where did you get this?" he demanded, looking up at me with a mixture of anger and fear. "From your desk the day you walked out on your son," I replied. "There's more. Keep going." With visible reluctance, Jason removed the stack of papers. The top document was a DNA test I had arranged using a sample from Noah's routine pediatric blood work and a strand of Jason's hair I had kept from a brush. The results confirmed with 99.9% certainty that Jason was Noah's father. "A paternity test?" Richard asked, unfun, leaning forward to see the paper in Jason's hands. Was that really necessary, Lillian? Apparently it was, I answered, since your son and his girlfriend just suggested Noah isn't a Harrison. But that's not the most interesting part of what's in that envelope. Jason continued through the documents, his complexion growing increasingly ashen. Behind the paternity test were the papers I had discovered in his desk, now organized and annotated with my research findings. Jason, what is it? Sophia asked, trying to read over his shoulder. He pushed her hand away, scanning the pages with growing horror. Richard stood and moved behind Jason, his own face registering shock as he recognized what his son was holding. Where did these come from? Richard demanded, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. As I said. Jason's desk, I replied, adjusting Noah on my lap. He was watching the scene with wide, innocent eyes, completely unaware of the momentous revelation unfolding around him. But the more interesting question is what they reveal about the Harrison family. I turned my attention to the other guests, who were watching with undisguised fascination. Did you know that the Harrison family has a history of abandoning inconvenient children and paying off their mothers? A collective gasp rippled through the room. Victoria's hand flew to her throat, and several of the business associates exchanged uncomfortable glances. That's a ridiculous accusation, Richard blustered, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Is it? I asked. The documents show regular payments to a woman with the initials MS for over 30 years. There's a confidentiality agreement dated 1985, right around the time you would have been working closely with your former secretary, Margaret Sullivan. Richard's face flushed dark red. Victoria's complexion, by contrast, had gone completely white. I continued, my voice steady, despite my racing heart. The most interesting document is the birth certificate for a boy named Michael Sullivan, born 9 months after the company Christmas party in 1984. There's no father listed, but given the financial arrangements that followed, I think we can make an educated guess. This is outrageous, Richard sputtered. These are private family matters that have nothing to do with. They have everything to do with how you're treating my son, I interrupted. Because history is repeating itself, isn't it? Another Harrison man abandoning his child, another payoff attempted, another woman expected to quietly disappear. Eleanor's voice cut through the tension. She's right, Richard. I told you years ago that your treatment of Margaret and her son would come back to haunt this family. All eyes turned to Eleanor, whose face showed a mixture of sadness and vindication. Mother, you knew about this, Victoria asked, her voice barely audible. I know everything that happens in this family, Eleanor replied. I've watched the pattern repeat itself through generations. Harrison men treating women and children as disposable when they become inconvenient. I hoped Jason would be different, but apparently the rot goes too deep. Jason finally found his voice. You had no right to these documents, he said to me, but the accusation sounded hollow. And you had no right to abandon your son, I countered. Or to sit here while your family mocked him and questioned his paternity. I pulled out the final item from the envelope that Jason hadn't reached yet, a photograph of a young man in his 30s with unmistakable Harrison features. This is Michael Sullivan today, I said, placing the photo on the table. Your half-brother Jason, Noah's uncle. I found him living in Portland working as an architect. He never knew who his father was, only that he received mysterious trust payments his entire life. The resemblance between Michael and Noah was striking, the same chin, the same set of the eyes. Even more telling was Michael's resemblance to Jason himself, a similarity that couldn't be denied. The most revealing thing about meeting Michael, I continued, was learning that he has the same congenital heart murmur that Noah was diagnosed with last month. The pediatric cardiologist mentioned it's often hereditary, but when I asked Jason's parents about family medical history, they claimed there was nothing to report. Victoria had the grace to look ashamed at this. Jason stared at the photo of his half-brother, seemingly unable to process what he was seeing. I've invited Michael to New York next month, I added. He's curious to meet the brother he never knew he had, and to meet his nephew. Sophia broke the stunned silence that followed. Jason, is this true? Did you know about this brother? Jason's lack of response was answer enough. Sophia gathered her purse and stood. I need some air, she muttered, hurrying from the room. Richard attempted to regain control of the situation. This is a private family matter that has been grossly misrepresented. I suggest we adjourn to the library for brandy and... No, Richard, Eleanor interrupted. No more hiding, no more secrets. Lillian has done what none of us had the courage to do, speak the truth. She turned to the stunned dinner guests. Yes, my son fathered a child with his secretary and then paid her to disappear. Yes, we've kept it hidden for decades. And yes, Jason knew about his half-brother and participated in the cover-up. Mother, Richard exploded. Eleanor continued undeterred. The Harrison legacy isn't just hotels and real estate. It's also broken promises and abandoned children. But it stops now. She fixed her gaze on Jason. You have a choice to make. You can be like your father, weak, selfish, concerned only with appearances. Or you can be a real man and acknowledge your son. Jason looked from Eleanor to me, then down at the documents spread before him. For the first time since I'd known him, he seemed genuinely at a loss. I stood gathering Noah's things. I didn't come here looking for money or status, I said quietly. I came because Noah deserves to know his family and he deserves to be acknowledged. What happens next is up to you. With Noah secure in my arms, I walked toward the door, my head high, despite the tears threatening to spill. Behind me, the distinguished dinner guests sat in stunned silence, witnesses to the unraveling of the carefully constructed Harrison family myth. As I reached the doorway, Eleanor's voice rang out once more. Lillian, I turned. Thank you, she said simply. Some truths need to be spoken aloud to be properly heard. I nodded once, then carried my son out into the night, leaving behind the shattered remains of the dinner party and the secrets that had finally been exposed to the light. The crisp night air felt like freedom as Noah and I left the Harrison estate. I buckled him into his car seat, his little face peaceful now that we were away from the tension. The Uber driver, sensing my emotional state, quietly asked if I was okay. Better than I've been in a long time, I answered truthfully. The drive back to our apartment was a blur of streetlights and reflections, my mind replaying the shocked faces around that gleaming mahogany table. I had gone to the dinner expecting judgment and mockery. I hadn't expected to walk out feeling victorious, having finally spoken truths that had been buried for too long. As we arrived home, my phone buzzed with a text from Jason. We need to talk, privately. I put Noah to bed, watching him sleep for a few minutes, marveling at his perfect innocence. Whatever happened next, I had done right by him tonight. I had refused to let him be erased or diminished by people who should have loved him unconditionally. Jason was waiting outside my building when I returned from dropping Noah at daycare the next morning. He looked haggard with dark circles under his eyes and yesterday's clothes still on. When he saw me, he straightened up, attempting to recapture some of his usual polish. That was quite a performance last night, he began. It wasn't a performance, Jason. It was the truth. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration I recognized from our marriage. You had no right to expose family matters like that. Do you have any idea what you've done? My father's reputation, the company image. Is that really what you're concerned about? I interrupted. Your father's reputation. What about Noah? What about your responsibility to your son? Jason fell silent, unable to meet my eyes. Why did you invite me to that dinner? I asked. Was it just another opportunity to humiliate me? I didn't invite you, he admitted. Grandmother insisted. Now I understand why. We stood in uncomfortable silence until Jason finally spoke again. My parents want to meet with us. They're prepared to offer a significantly improved settlement if you'll agree to keep the information about Michael private. I couldn't help but laugh. Still trying to buy silence? Haven't you learned anything? Lillian, be reasonable. This could secure Noah's future. Private school, college, everything he might need. What he needs is a father, Jason. Money can't replace that. His expression hardened. I'm not cut out for fatherhood. I've never pretended otherwise. Then be honest about it. Don't hide behind lawyers and settlements. Don't let your parents pretend Noah doesn't exist or isn't a true Harrison. He deserves better than that, even if you can't be the father he needs. Jason looked genuinely conflicted for perhaps the first time since I'd known him. What do you want from me? Lillian, really. I want you to acknowledge your son. Visit him. Know him. Support him not just financially, but emotionally. And I want your family to treat him with the respect he deserves as your child, regardless of how our marriage ended. And Michael? Jason asked quietly. Do you expect me to have a relationship with him too? That's between you and the brother your family kept from you. But Noah should know his uncle, especially given the health connection. Jason nodded slowly. I need time to process all this. Noah doesn't have time, Jason. He's growing every day, missing you every day, even though he's too young to know what he's missing. He didn't respond directly to that, instead saying, my lawyers will contact yours with revised terms. Then he walked away, shoulders slightly hunched, a man confronting truths he'd spent his life avoiding. In the weeks that followed, the changes were gradual but significant. The new settlement offer was indeed generous, with provisions for Noah's education, healthcare, and future security. More surprisingly, Jason requested a visitation schedule, starting with supervised visits at my apartment. His first visit was awkward and brief. He held Noah stiffly, as if afraid he might break. Noah stared at the stranger with solemn curiosity before offering a tentative smile that seemed to catch Jason off guard. "He has my eyes," Jason said softly, a note of wonder in his voice. "I've been telling you that since he was born," I replied without bitterness. The most unexpected outcome was my growing friendship with Michael Sullivan, Jason's half-brother. Our first meeting was charged with emotion as he saw in Noah the family resemblance he had never understood in himself. All my life I felt like a puzzle with missing pieces. Michael told me over coffee during his visit to New York. My mother never spoke badly of my father, just said he wasn't able to be part of our lives. But I always sensed there was more to the story. Michael had his own family, now a wife and 2 daughters, who were technically Noah's cousins. Through him, Noah gained an extended family that welcomed him without reservation. Jason and Michael met separately, a private conversation I wasn't part of. But afterward, Jason seemed changed, more thoughtful. Their relationship was tentative, but growing, 2 men discovering the brotherhood that had been denied them. Eleanor became a regular visitor, delighting in Noah's development and often bringing small, thoughtful gifts. "You've given this family a chance to heal," she told me once, "to face its shadows and perhaps become something better." My own healing journey was complex and ongoing. I found a therapist who specialized in divorce and single parenting. I joined a support group for mothers navigating similar situations. Slowly, I rebuilt my sense of self beyond the roles of wife and mother, reconnecting with the ambitious, confident woman I had been before. Rachel remained my rock, celebrating each small victory and providing perspective when I needed it. "You stood up to an entire dynasty," she reminded me when I had moments of doubt. "Never forget how strong that makes you." My career began to flourish again as I found my footing in the new marketing position. My boss recognized my talent and gave me increasing responsibility, eventually offering a partnership track that would allow me the flexibility Noah's schedule required. On Noah's first birthday, we held a small celebration at a local park. I had invited Jason but didn't expect him to come. To my surprise, he arrived with a carefully wrapped gift and an awkward smile. "I wouldn't miss it," he said simply. Eleanor came too, as did Michael and his family. Even Victoria made a brief appearance, bringing an extravagant gift and making stilted conversation. Richard remained conspicuously absent, still unable to face the consequences of his own past actions. As I watched Noah being passed from arms to arms, loved and celebrated by this unlikely assembly of people, I realized how far we had come from that devastating dinner. The truth had not been easy or comfortable, but it had created space for something authentic to grow in place of secrets and denial. The road ahead wouldn't be simple. Co-parenting with Jason would always be complicated. The Harrison family dynamics would never be entirely healthy. But Noah would grow up knowing who he was and where he came from, with people in his life who, however imperfectly, acknowledged and loved him. Later that night, after all the guests had gone, and Noah was sleeping peacefully in his crib, I sat on my small balcony, looking out at the city lights. I thought about the envelope that had changed everything, and the courage it had taken to slide it across that table. Sometimes the hardest moments in our lives lead to the greatest freedom. Sometimes standing up for those we love gives us strength we never knew we had. And sometimes the family we create from the broken pieces turns out to be stronger than what came before. My story isn't over, it's evolving every day as Noah grows and our circumstances change. But I'll never again allow anyone to make me feel small or unworthy. I'll never let anyone diminish my son or question his place in the world. That night at the Harrison dinner table taught me that truth spoken with dignity and courage is the most powerful thing we possess. Have you ever had to stand up to family for the sake of your child? What gave you the strength to push through that difficult moment? Share your story in the comments below. And if you found something valuable in my experience, please like and subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and healing. Remember, sometimes the hardest conversations lead to the most important breakthroughs. Thank you for listening, and may you find the courage to speak your own truths when the moment calls for it.